What was your biggest "we need to leave now" moment? Story 1. I've written about this before. I was in a mall in Indonesia, and two tourists seemed to be having trouble communicating with the cashier at a bookstore, so I helped translate. They wanted to buy me drinks to thank me. I told them it wasn't necessary and that I had to get back to my mom soon. They asked me to meet them for dinner. I said I had to eat at home. They told me to sneak out and meet them after dinner. At this point, a bookstore staff member noticed something was off and went over to question them. My sister and I dashed off while they were distracted. We continued wandering around the mall and realized they were following us. To see if we were just paranoid, we ducked into a lingerie store, thinking two men wouldn't usually need to go lingerie shopping together. They followed us in. We ran quickly back to the jewelry store where our mom was. The store had intimidating security guards, and I guess that stopped those guys. I was 11. My sister was 10. Story 2. I was waiting at the train station to pick up a friend of mine. I was early, so I decided to stand in the sun just outside the station. A guy with a bicycle walked up to me, asking in broken English if I knew what time the train would arrive. After I answered, he stayed around and started talking to me. Now I know that's not weird on its own, but the things he asked, the way he acted, and how he looked just gave me a creepy vibe. Eventually, he asked if I would walk with him while he dropped off his bicycle. I didn't want to because the bike storage area at this station is very secluded, and honestly, I didn't want to be alone with him. So I noped out and walked into the station. He started yelling at me and calling me names, but at that moment, the train came in, and it got very busy. So he left. A few months later, I read an article in the local paper about a girl being assaulted at the station. They included a sketch of the suspect since he hadn't been caught yet. It was the same guy. To this day, I'm very grateful I didn't go with him. Story 3. About 2 months ago, I'd stayed up past my usual bedtime, and as soon as I got in bed, I smelled something odd and heard some inconsistent banging and clattering from downstairs. I don't live in a great neighborhood, so none of this was unusual, but I got out of bed to check anyway, and saw flames licking up the side of the building. I yelled at my wife to get out of bed, threw on some clothes, and we hightailed it out. Our building shares a wall with the next one, and that one had an apartment on the ground floor fully engulfed by the time we made it outside. They ended up condemning the whole building. I was the first one to call 911. I've been jerking myself awake in the night pretty consistently since then. Story 4. I was waiting for an Uber on the outskirts of Atlanta with a couple of friends around 10 p.m. We were just hanging out after leaving a nearby restaurant and talking about what bar to go to. A disheveled older man walked up a few feet behind one of my friends and struck a weird pose for 2 to 3 minutes while looking in our direction, and there was no one else around. Then he walked off without saying a word. He came back a few minutes later and sat down on the sidewalk about 5 feet away from us. At this point, I was wondering if he wanted something from us, because there was absolutely no other reason to plop down that close on an empty sidewalk. Then a small sedan pulled into a nearby parking lot, parking behind some bushes in the spot closest to us, and furthest from any of the shops in that lot. I only noticed because I happened to be facing that direction, but then saw 6 guys pile out of the sedan and immediately cross the street directly toward us. I realized there weren't any shops or restaurants still open nearby. It suddenly occurred to me that the strange dude might have been sizing us up earlier and came back to mark us. We were all dressed nicely, with smartphones out and watches visible. Basically, the fanciest stuff we had for a night out. Right as I started to speak up that we should head back toward other people, our Uber pulled up to the curb. As we drove away, I watched those 6 guys talking in a circle where we had just been standing. Then they crossed the street again and got back in their car. I'll never have a definitive answer, but I'm pretty sure we were 10 seconds away from some unfortunate shenanigans. Let me know when you're ready to send more. Story 5. My friend invited me to a seminar. Everyone was dressed in white shirts and black pants with black shoes. I was the odd one out in there. For some weird reason, they were praising the founder as if he was some kind of god. When I went into the auditorium, they were showing how these 17-year-olds were earning rupees. 200,000 in a month, which is a heck of a lot in India, translated to about $3,500, with their own bikes, cars, and stuff like that. Then it dawned on me that this was eerily similar to one of the biggest scams that used a similar business model about 7 years ago at the time. I really wanted to move out as soon as possible. My brainwashed friend was sitting a few rows behind me. All of those involved in this marketing were required to do so, for some weird reason. It was cringy at best, and exploitative at worst. Never caught up with him ever since. That friend of mine wasn't really a bad person or anything. He didn't even force me to buy the product or anything. Maybe due to the fact that I studied in a different city. The product seemed really good from the outside, but the method of selling really looked like one for MLM. There was another person in that group who was from my school, didn't know him in any way, who forced one of my family friends, went to the same school, to buy that product. He then resorted to swearing and abused her online for not buying the product. I'm not sure if it is a full-fledged MLM because the participants weren't forced to buy the product in bulk. Probably because all of them were students. I don't recall the name of the company, so I don't know how that company is still doing. Story 6. A friend and I were exploring an abandoned hospital, and the way it was set out was via a bunch of joined buildings. All the windows and doors were boarded up aside from one place where we could squeeze in past a loose board. And the layout meant that once we were in through there, we had access to pretty much the entire main building. Obviously, it was darker than dark in there, and we had to remember which wing we'd come in from. We had flashlights, so it wasn't too bad. But then we got to this room where there was a lot of cool stuff left behind. Beds, filing cabinets, etc. And we wanted to take pictures, so we turned the flashlights off so we could use the flash on the camera. We did this for 10 minutes or so, only seeing the room in the bright flash from the camera. Everything was cool, and then we both slowly became aware of noises. Usually, an abandoned building is pretty quiet, apart from water dripping and wind doing weird things, but we could hear floors creaking, doors creaking, the occasional scrape or crash of metal against the floor. Basically, it sounded like someone was blundering around in the dark. Now, the layout means that in order to get back to where we came in, we have to walk back towards the noise. There's only one route. We're getting freaked out, so we start moving back through the rooms, stopping to listen all the while. Finally, we get to the side hall that we came in from, and we bolt to the door at the end, finally risking turning the flashlights on and making noise. It's the wrong freaking door. We stand there, listening to the footsteps get closer. We're frozen, standing in the dark, totally cornered. If whoever or whatever is making that noise comes down this short hall, we're in trouble. We wait and listen, holding our breaths. The scraping and shuffling approaches, slowly comes past, and then fades. We wait a bit, and then creep out of the hall and into the main building again. Carefully, we move one hall over, where we can see a sliver of light from the loose board. We quietly make our way towards it. Then we hear an almighty scrape and bang behind us, as though someone tipped over one of the huge metal filing cabinets. I mean, it was loud. I yell, "Time to go!" And we sprint for the door, and there are clear footsteps right behind us. We launch ourselves through the loose board and down the overgrown path, before taking a quick look back. We can't see anything through the small gap, but we do not stick around to see if that changes. Story 7. My friend and I, both females, met up for the first time back home from college. It was a surprisingly nice day outside in the middle of winter, so we decided to get lunch and eat outside. We found a park that had no one there, and were sitting at a picnic table catching up, when I saw a scruffy-looking guy in a large work van with no rear windows pull into the parking lot. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him at first, but I noticed he was moving around the outside of the van for a bit and kept looking our way. He finally walked down the sidewalk toward us and passed by our picnic table and walked around the back side of the restroom building to look down the hill on the other side of it, very obviously casing out the place. He walked back to his van, and my friend and I were discussing what we were going to do while I watched him open up the back of the van and start digging around in it. He made a call on his cell phone, and a few minutes later, another male pulled up in a different car. He got out and started talking to the first guy, who not very discreetly pointed in our direction. They immediately started walking toward us, and my friend and I scooped what was left of lunch and fast walked out of the place while keeping an eye on them. One of the times in my life I could literally feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It could have been nothing, but even now I feel pretty certain that they had something planned, and I am glad we left. Story 8. I was on a date with a girl hiking a trail system that I knew like the back of my hand. Something felt weird, but I shook it off. We went in around sunset. We were going to swim in one of the deep pools in the creek. Maybe 2 miles into the trail, I got the feeling again, and she was talking her head off, but I was just listening to everything around me. I told her to stop talking, and she looked at me very concerned. I just put my finger to my lips and listened. I heard something familiar, but I couldn't place it. We never stopped walking. We came to the arroyo just before the creek pool, and I heard it again. By this time, I knew. I told her we were going to walk to the clearing where the arroyo was at and turn around. She told me she heard something weird. As we came to the clearing, we stood there like statues, dead silent. Her nails cut my arm from gripping it so hard. Then, around 15 feet from us, the biggest mountain lion I've ever seen crossed the clearing with 2 of its young. She looked at us, and as our eyes met, my soul left my body, and I felt her grip tighten around my arm even more. She stopped, and so did her babies. I'm guessing she sized us up, and then just kept going. The babies kept turning around looking at us, but ultimately they just slowly crossed the top of the hill, and that was that. We turned around and told everyone we saw on the way in that there were 3 mountain lions on the trail. They all turned around and left. That was the first time I was ever scared out in nature. I didn't have a handgun on me. I had been there 100 times. She told me the sound she heard was a deep purring, and that was what I kept hearing also. I just hadn't put it together. Story 9. I'm 19F on a Greek island last May with my cousin, 22F, as a part of a trip. We like to go on aimless walks out of the towns we stayed in to see what was around. On our way back from one of these walks, we were on a long, narrow road that dropped off on each side to beaches. A small green car passed by us in the same direction we were walking, and stopped 50 to 100 yards in front of us, just sitting on the road. We said maybe they were just taking in the view. We continued walking, and when we finally got to the car, the passenger, our side window, was down, and the man was staring at us through the mirror. As soon as we passed, the car pulled forward past us again. Immediately after the green car drove past us again, a large truck drove past, again in the same direction, and pulled alongside the green car. They both stopped for a moment and were clearly talking to each other. The green car sped off, the black truck drove forward a bit more, and then stopped on the same side of the road again. Keep in mind, we were on a narrow road. We couldn't turn around because town was the other way. Behind us were just beaches and a couple of houses. The black truck was stopped on our side of the road. As we got closer, The driver opened the front and back door to the cab, but did nothing else. Just stood there outside of the truck, mostly looking back towards us. We decided that this was way too sketchy. Both cars were clearly keeping an eye on us and watching and communicating. When we got closer to the truck, we noped off the road and dropped into the beach. We got as far away from the road as the beach would allow us and started speed walking. The man from the truck crossed the road and watched us with binoculars from the side of the beach. We ran until we caught up with another couple and followed them back into town. I saw the same green car drive back past us multiple times as we ran parallel to the road down the beach. We made it back to our hotel-that-apartment thing safely and locked and tied up our doors to the balcony and hall. Story 10. I was in college when I had my first solo apartment. This guy across the hall would come over or invite me over, and we'd hang out a few times. However, I would not call him a friend. One night, he asked me to loan him some money. In addition to not wanting to loan him money, I didn't really have any, so he proceeded to ask for a ride to see his girlfriend because she had some money for him. I agreed. We arrived at her apartment, and a small party was going on. When we walked into the party, everyone immediately shut up and stared at us. He ran off to find his girlfriend, who I found out was his ex-girlfriend. It was awkward because I was kind of this guy's friend by association, and I was getting lots of angry stares. He got into an argument with her, and we were basically thrown out of the place. He then asked if I could take him to another part of town. He owed another guy some money and needed to go talk to him. We proceeded to an unfamiliar part of town, and he instructed me to park in a fairly isolated spot. He explained that he didn't want the other guy to see my car, because he might take it. He owed this guy money for gambling or drugs or something else bad, and he was way behind on his payments. I left him and spent the rest of my time in that apartment avoiding him. Story 11. It was early 2019, and I was with my girlfriend at the time walking through the woods near my house, as we often did. We were having an intense argument over something stupid when I noticed something through the trees off the trail where we were walking. It was a man wearing a dark top and blue jeans. People came into these woods all the time, but what was weird was this man wasn't on any trails. He was in the middle of the overgrowth. I told her to be quiet. I know, bad idea, especially in an argument, and she just got madder at me. I told her again and pointed in the direction I was looking. At first, she didn't see what I was talking about, so I told her to look for blue since the man's jeans stood out the most. Then she saw him, a man walking through the overgrowth, following us. I didn't know who this guy was, but he looked older. Still, I wasn't taking any chances, especially with my girlfriend there, so I told her, "Let's go, we have to leave." And we walked faster. The trouble was, we were in the middle of nowhere and far from any exits. And to be honest, my girlfriend at the time wasn't exactly physically fit, so walking fast was hard for her. We walked as fast as she could, and I kept looking behind us, and that old man was still following us in the overgrowth, obviously trying to remain hidden. We ended up leaving the woods and never going back there together. I've been back there many times since alone, and have had a few strange encounters with another person that looks kind of like the old man. But I can't say for sure it's the same guy, as he is always watching from afar. He never does anything besides follow from a distance, but I've seen him a total of 3 times, spooky. Story 12. When I was 15, a friend and I went for a lot of walks around town. Small town, around 5,000 to 6,000 people. We were going to the cyber cafe in town to meet a few friends, and we often took different streets to get places, just to keep it interesting. We were about to go to Main Street off one of the side streets when a man on a bicycle approached us. He got off his bike and asked us a couple of small talk questions. Something didn't seem right about him. He was probably in his mid-40s. We both kept inching away, but didn't want to come off as too rude, so we answered about the weather or traffic. Then he paused, and we said we had to go. And he said, and I'll never forget it, "You look so young. I don't want to get in trouble, but I need to touch someone. I just need to touch you. You should come with me." And he started rambling. I just felt terror, couldn't even speak. I grabbed my friend's hand and turned. We sprinted the rest of the way to the cafe, and as soon as we were inside, we asked to use the phone. I called my mom to pick us up, while my friend told the worker what happened and what the guy looked like. A month later, I got my first cell phone. Story 13. I posted this in a similar one of these threads a couple of months ago, but I'll paste it over here. I used to drive for Lyft. April 2018, I picked up a young couple from a bar at about 1:30 a.m. They were fairly chill, and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. The dude asked me to stop at a corner store on the way to their destination so that he could get cigarettes. I didn't see any harm in waiting, so I stopped and had a nice chat with the young woman while he was in the store. He ended up being about 5 minutes since everyone was trying to get their pre-2 a.m. beer. When he came out, he asked me to take him to a location that was in the opposite direction of their destination, but was only about a mile away. He said he wanted to meet some friends real quick and grab some beer. Since I figured it would be my last ride of the night, I said, "Whatever, why not?" and drove him over there. Now, I know the town we live in fairly well, but the direction that we were coming from was not a way I was used to going when I would go to this location. So when I turned onto the destination street, I missed the turn into the complex parking lot. I just came to a complete stop, since the roads were empty, and asked them if they just wanted me to park on the street or pull into the complex. This is when the two of them started arguing, as he suddenly wanted to go in and hang out for a few minutes, while she didn't want to go in at all. She just wanted him to do his thing and get out of there so they could go home. And then something hit my car. The sound is unmistakable to me, so I immediately started to look around to figure out what it was. But there were no other cars on the road, so that couldn't have been it. Then I moved to the next thing on my mental checklist. If something didn't hit me, then what did I hit? But that didn't make any sense either, as I'd been in park and couldn't have hit anything. It's at this point that the young lady's attitude completely changed. She just kinda looked around and then said, "Can we just get out of here? It hurts, and I want to go home." This was odd to me, as she'd been sitting in my car for about 10 minutes at this point and hadn't said a word about any kind of pain. She followed this up with, "It hurts, and I can't move," put her hand to her back, and pulled it out, covered in blood. So the guy starts freaking out, thinking that something in my trunk had exploded. But it was empty. As he reached over to tend to her, I noticed something white sticking out of the seat. This hadn't been there at the beginning of the night, so I asked him what it was. He pulled on it. It was a piece of the filler fuzz from my seat. It came out of the hole that had been made in the seat, because she'd been shot. As soon as he grabbed that fuzz, we both had the same realization. He slammed shut his door, and I drove them straight to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away. That realization, and the follow-up realization of, oh, someone could still shoot you while you're sitting here, was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever experienced. Story 14. I was 15 at the time. I took about 10 of my little cousins with me to the park. 3 of my older cousins, but still younger than me or the same age, came with me to help. As I approached the park, there was a man and 2 other kids there. He came up to me and started talking to me. I tried to give him the hint that I didn't want to talk, but he kept going. I asked him, "Oh, did you bring your kids with you?" He nodded and kept talking. Then he asked me weird questions like, "Are you married? Are those your kids? How old are you?" I lied about my name and age and tried to walk away. Then he said, "I like you. Want to sit with me and talk?" I said I had something important to tell my family first, and I'd join him after. I smiled and went up to one of my older cousins and said, "Pretend everything is okay, but we need to leave now." She nodded, and I watched as the two kids left without the man. So we started walking home again, and I made sure he didn't follow or watch where we went. I later found out that he had picked up one of my little cousins and put him down again. And one of my cousins saw, but she froze and didn't say anything to me. Luckily, one of us saw him walk into a house, and so we called the police. Story 15. About 3 months ago, there was a shootout at my office park. My next-door neighbor was robbed and beaten, but his partner arrived during the robbery, waited for the robbers to exit, and then opened fire on their cars with an AK-47 in the parking lot. Turns out, my neighbors weren't Amazon resellers. They were drug dealers. While the robbery was going down, I felt sick to my stomach and just knew I had to get out. I left and was about to walk by their place when I had a bad feeling and went back inside to use the restroom. While I was in there, my heart was racing, and I didn't know why. I ended up dribbling all over my leg, practically hyperventilating. Then the shots rang out. 2 bursts. I hit the floor and hid in the bathroom. When I finally came out, there were people all over the parking lot, and the air stunk of gun smoke, but everyone was okay. I ran all the way home, 2 miles. Watching the security tapes later, you see me walk in front of the shooter twice, as he sits in his car waiting to ambush the robbers. If I hadn't gone back to use the restroom, I would have been right in the middle of it all. I also could have left as soon as I got the feeling and would have been clear. But since I didn't get out fast enough, going back to pee probably saved me. I'm still shaken up, and I'm still having nightmares. Talking about it here helps. Story 16. There's a few for me, but a significant one. I was 10 years old, and my aunt had a small 100-acre farm that was also used as a livery yard for horses. I had a pony called Toffee. We often had kids come into our fields from the neighboring park. They would antagonize the livestock and horses, set dogs on the sheep, set fire to hay, and just generally cause stress and damage. We were told to stay away and ignore them, and tell an adult if we saw them. The police often did nothing, as the kids would escape onto the park, and the council refused to allow us to close off the public footpaths through the fields. It was a true misery. I went to catch my pony from the field and saw he was sweaty and wide-eyed. I don't think he understood for a moment that he was safe with me from the frightened look he gave me. I realized suddenly there were 6 people in the copse of our field. I was suddenly frightened and tried to encourage Toffee to come with me quickly. Initially, the boys ran. I believe when they saw how small I was and that I was no threat, the group made their way back toward me. The field was 5 acres, and this all occurred in one of the corners. 3 of them dropped their trousers and flashed at me. Keep in mind, I was a 10-year-old little girl who did not understand but had an idea what was implied. In a panic, I went to grab my pony, but he was scared of them and backed away. One of the boys shouted, "If you touch that horse, I'm going to hurt you." Toffee, in that moment, charged briefly toward them. I don't know if it was fight, not flight, kicking in, or if he sensed my terror, but it was enough to scatter the boys. I started to turn and bolt as fast as my legs could carry me toward the gate. One of the boys chased after me. I obviously screamed for my life and felt his hand briefly run over my hair before he fell over. I sprang the gate and ran down the drive to the barn where my aunt and mom were. I always wonder about if I had not run in that moment, or Toffee had not charged at them, if I'd be alive. The field was far away from safety. My parents would leave me for hours alone at the farm. There was a forest and stream as well, so my small body could easily have been hidden. If any are curious, I still have Toffee about 13 years later. He's 27 and a very old, grumpy pony. I'll keep him till he departs the world. He has given so much joy for the little he gave, and he might have saved me had he not taken off when he did. Story 17. I used to really enjoy driving around at night. especially because where I live, there are a lot of country roads, and they were fun to zip around. One evening, after I'd been at a friend's house, I decided to drive to my church, about half an hour away from home, and back just listening to music. The route is one I've done most Sundays for 17 years being driven, and driving it for about 4 years at that point, so even in the dark, I felt fine going 60 miles per hour. Speed limit. I got maybe a quarter of the way there, and my stomach started really twisting. I knew that if I kept going, I'd regret it. But I shook it off. It wasn't that late, and the weather was fine. I wasn't going to miss this driving opportunity. But as I got further, the feeling in my stomach got so much worse, and I realized I had to turn around. Just before I reached the hill pass that's about halfway to the church, I pulled a U-turn and went home, and stopped feeling so anxious and forgot about it. Next day, I woke up and got in my car to go to church, only to find my usual route had been closed. Turned out that on the hill pass, the road had crumbled away, leaving a sheer drop that would have been around a blind bend for me. The road issue had been called in by a driver going the opposite direction to me about 5 minutes after I'd pulled a U-turn and driven away. I'd definitely have been, at the very least, badly hurt had I kept going. Story 18. I live in New Orleans, LA, and years ago my brother wanted to adopt a dog from a small rural town about 2-ish hours away from NOLA. It was an easy enough drive, but as we got close to the town, Clinton, LA, I started noticing a ton of police driving around. No sirens, nobody speeding by, but I think I probably saw 15 to 20 patrol cars in the span of about 10 minutes. We get to the house, meet the foster mom and the dog, who is the sweetest thing in the world, decide to adopt her, and head home about 2 hours later. Everything seems fine. Tali, the dog, climbs up into the front seat while I'm driving and falls asleep, leaving my brother to sit in the back by himself, which was hilarious. We keep driving and notice that there are even more cops driving around, but still no sirens. They're just everywhere, though. As we're leaving Clinton, maybe about 3 miles to the exit or so, I notice this old white sedan come flying up on our rear, flashing their lights, honking, etc. I didn't really think about it, but I figured maybe these people were hurt and needed help or something. It definitely wasn't a cop car, but it was unusual for sure. I started to pull over to the shoulder, and they pulled over as well, about 10 to 15 yards behind us where they stopped. I stopped the car, and when I turned around I looked at my brother. For some reason, as soon as our eyes met, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I realized that there was something very wrong about this. I still hesitated, wanting to see if somebody needed help, but as soon as the door of the car behind us opened, a voice inside my head said, "Get out of there right this second." I peeled out and sped for the exit, making sure nobody had followed us. We got back to New Orleans safe and sound, but the entire time I was watching for that car to ensure they didn't follow. I never learned what happened with all of the police cars or the white sedan, but something was really wrong. I should have listened to my gut way sooner. Stopping even temporarily was really dumb of me. I hypothesized that there was a drug raid or something, and the cops were looking for somebody while we were driving through. The white sedan was trying to get us to pull over so they could carjack us and dodge the cops further. I don't know, though, and I hope it wasn't innocent and somebody needed help and I bailed. But I don't think so. I think something sketchy was going on. Story 19. A couple of friends and I were outside a house party talking. I noticed out of the corner of my eye something dart behind some bushes towards the end of the block, maybe 4 houses down? It was dark out, so it was hard to tell. We stood there a bit longer, and I swore I saw something again move to a tree a little closer. This wasn't the best neighborhood. Heck, my whole hometown isn't the safest. And I knew a couple people at the party were involved in some stuff, so I don't know if that entered my mind or what. But I got immediate goosebumps. I said, "Let's go, now." A couple of my friends looked at me weird, but later one told me they knew by the look on my face something was up. Apparently, I looked possessed. I had my keys, so we ran to my car and got in. I didn't even let anyone get their seatbelts on. I just hit the gas. Based on the news stories, probably less than 5 minutes later, a group of people shot up the house we were at. The others standing outside were severely injured or killed. Turns out a couple of guys at the party were thought to have killed someone's family member, and it was a revenge thing. This was over 20 years ago, and I still get nervous if I'm standing around outside, especially if it's dark. Story 20. I was 15 and had just moved to a new town right in the middle of the school year. I met some kids that seemed cool and took them up on an offer to hang out and spend the night at one of their houses. The evening started off great. The host's mom made pizza for everyone. They had a pool table and a PlayStation. I was having a lot of fun when they all decided to head up to Mike's and try to buy some weed. I had not been around drugs at all, but was feeling rebellious and nervously went along. It turned out that Mike lived in a questionably habitable house trailer about 15 miles out of town in the woods, with somewhat of an entourage of seedy figures. He was a formidable character, lanky, wild-eyed, and rail-thin with a nervous way about him that instantly put me on edge. I'm a big guy, and he instantly started sizing me up, grabbing my shoulders several times and squeezing my arms. He said I looked like a fighter and asked me if I wanted to fight him. I declined, but he kept telling everyone I was going to fight him. I'm sure I was visibly nervous, but my new friends just laughed it off and asked if they could buy some weed. He insisted that we have a drink first. I had also never drank, but I did my best to choke down the warm beer that was shoved unceremoniously into my hand. I took in my surroundings as we drank. There was tin foil and glass pipes on every flat surface, at least 3 guns, and the rest of the adults looked like they were well ahead of us in the consumption department. My friend insisted on getting the weed, but Mike kept telling him not to be in a hurry. He brought out a bong, lit it, and started passing it around. This was the first time I smoked weed. He harangued me over how I wasn't inhaling enough, and then laughed like a hyena when I had a coughing fit. He kept making comments on how I was big and acted tough, but was really just a big wuss, and other choice words that don't need repeating. He also made comments akin to taking me in the back room and making a man out of me. One of the tooth-impaired women began some long monologue about a man's G-spot being located rectally. I wanted to leave immediately. I took the first opportunity to tell my friend that I thought it best that we leave. And now. He finally convinced Mike to retrieve the weed for purchase, and an exchange was made. I tried to walk out, but Mike slammed the door when I opened it. He started insisting that I was a narc, and that I needed to strip naked so he could check me for a wire. This went on for a few minutes as I just stood there uncomfortably, hoping he would end his little joke and let us go. Finally, he said he'd know I wasn't a narc because I was going to smoke meth to prove it. I looked at my friend and just shook my head, but he was either too stoned, too apathetic, or just thought Mike was being funny. Either way, there was no help there. Mike disappeared to a back room while 3 men that had been sitting on a couch got up and pushed the couch in front of the door, laughing and telling us to sit down and get comfortable. I had a hallway behind me and walked down it, looking for a way out. There was a small laundry room at the end, and to my relief, a door. It was only to my relief until I saw that not only did it not have a handle, it was nailed shut. Mike began yelling for me to come back to the living room. My brain was in a tailspin. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. Do something. Move! I kicked the door. It opened. There were no stairs, so I jumped down to the snowy ground and began to run. I ran into the woods, grateful that I had not removed my coat in the warm house. I heard a commotion behind me as Mike screamed obscenities at me. I kept moving. Then I heard several gunshots. My heart was beating out of my chest. I had a general idea of where the road was and headed in that direction, avoiding the meandering lane that led to Mike's trailer. I slipped on the hillside several times, but luckily there was enough moonlight to navigate through the trees. I heard a loud truck start up and then more yelling. I was leaving a trail but couldn't avoid it. Eventually, I reached the frozen dirt road and started walking back towards the highway, staying in the trees. I saw headlights coming and hid, hoping it was my friend. It wasn't. Neither was the next one. I continued walking. It's worth noting that this was years before I had a cell phone. After about 4 miles, the road met the highway back to town. It was harder to avoid walking on the road at this point. It was clear for quite a ways on either side. But when a car came driving by, I ducked down in the snow on the shoulder, trying to get my head just high enough to see, hoping it was a police cruiser. I did this several times, my jeans soaked, me shivering with cold and fear. It was about the 4th time or so that I did this that I noticed the car was driving much slower than the 65-mile-per-hour speed limit. Was this Mike, coming to find the suspected narc? I stayed low and prepared to run. As it got closer, I recognized my friend's minivan. I stood up and waved and hoped for the best. My friends told me that the scene inside the house had turned to absolute chaos after I kicked the door open. Mike had gone ballistic, screaming that I was a narc and that he was going to kill me. He had picked up a gun and pointed it at my friends, telling them he was going to kill them for bringing a narc to his house. They insisted I was not, and that he had just scared me. He then stomped down the hallway and fired the gun several times out of the door I had kicked open. My friends took advantage of this moment to pull the couch out of the way and run out the front door, jumping in the minivan and tearing off down the lane. After turning onto the road, they saw headlights behind them and intentionally killed their lights and turned down someone else's lane. They waited a while and then went out looking for me, driving up and down the dirt road and highway, absolutely freaking out and not knowing what to do. They apologized profusely and insisted that nothing like that had ever happened before. We were all pretty relieved to be back together. Not long after this, Mike and several others were arrested in a drug sting. I was worried that he thought I had something to do with this and hoped he wouldn't be holding a grudge and want to come looking for me. A lingering fear that eventually subsided. Until one day, a couple years later. I was working at the local grocery store and here came Mike, looking a little worse for wear. He looked right at me, and my heart about stopped. Story 21. I've staffed a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers regularly sneak out during the night and drive into town to hang out, and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed toward town. After a couple hours of jokes, Baja blasts from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads, joking around and listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road, and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 a.m. as we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We notice an old, rusted boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light shining through the crack of the door, faintly flickering, and a fuse box right outside the door. The mood of the car changed in an instant. For just a moment we all sat in silence, watching the light flicker. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something didn't feel right. Eventually, to ease the tension we were all feeling, we started to joke, as teenage boys do, jeering at one of our friends to go turn off the light or open the door, when suddenly the door creaked open. The next few moments are a blur, but I can assure you that was the fastest an early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever booked it up a dirt road. All 5 of us stayed just about silent during the 15-minute drive back to camp. Something about the aura of the place felt off. To this day, when I imagine sitting in the front seat of that car, I get an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Was someone behind that door? Why were they there at 3:30 in the morning? Story 22. Got an Airbnb in Fort Worth at what seemed to be a spiritual retreat. We arrived to a padlocked gate with cameras, and the lady who opened the door had no shoes on. Looking around, there was furniture and overgrown shrubbery everywhere. The main house was dilapidated with rotting wood. We went inside, and they asked me and my girlfriend to sign waivers. This was the first red flag. We then walked out of the house to where we would be sleeping. While we walked through the compound, we saw other people that seemed somewhat normal, also without shoes. Our bedroom was an old RV near the back of the property. This RV was collapsed at the front, and they tried to cover it up with a bedsheet. After trying to reason why this situation was okay, me and my girlfriend decided to look around to make sure it wasn't as sketchy as we were making it out to be. During our walk, we saw these long wooden boxes that had strange labels on them. I was getting very cult vibes from the people there as well. Some of them seemed entranced. Then, a little girl came up to us, also no shoes, and started talking to us. The conversation was friendly at first, but then took a turn. She said something along the lines of, "What if I cut someone up with a knife and put them in the oven?" At first, I thought she was being sarcastic or joking, but she kept following us and talking about cutting people up and cooking them. That's when I knew I needed to get us out of there immediately. I told the lady that me and my girlfriend wanted to get dinner in town, so she could open the gate for us and let us out without raising suspicion. Story 23. Visited Paris a few years back with a friend. We're both females in our 20s at the time. Went for lunch at a restaurant and met some guy who presented himself as the owner of the place. While asking how the lunch was, he asked about our nationality, as it was easily understandable that we were not French. He then proceeded to tell us that one of his best friends is, insert nationality, too, and was thrilled to let him know some girls from his friend's country were eating at his restaurant. He called this friend and passed his phone to me to talk to him. Nothing weird, usual stuff, blah blah. At the end, he invited us to a party with live music, drinks, etc. We thought, why not? No plans for that evening. So we exchanged numbers and agreed to meet. My friend and I went to meet him at the address he gave us, which was some abandoned place with no movement around. We got this scary vibe while waiting for him to show up. A car approaches us. It's him, a man in his 50s. He was very polite, apologized for letting us wait, and tells us we're not far from the place. We get in his car, very afraid, but not wanting to show it and acting like everything is cool. We didn't know where we were going. He was telling us about his life, how he had been living in France for more than 30 years and missed our country so much, but work didn't allow him to take a vacation, so he hadn't visited in years. He seemed normal, but my friend and I knew we messed up and it was too late. We couldn't even talk about how to get out of the situation. My friend was freaking out. I just told her, "Please stay calm." We arrive at this building. It was dark outside. We could see no party at this place. He apologized once again, saying that the party was canceled, but some of his friends are inside, and we could have some drinks, talk a little, and he'd drive us to the hotel later. At this point, I told him that we'd prefer to go back to our hotel, if it was possible, to drop us off at the nearest bus station. He insisted that he really wanted to spend some time just chatting with us and wanted to offer some drinks to make up for the canceled party. I was trying to be as cool as possible, not wanting to offend this man because I didn't know how he'd react. He kept begging for us to go inside and maybe cook something for us, because I told him we were hungry. Hopefully, he agreed to drive us back to the hotel. It was 11 p.m. We gave him a false hotel address, of course. I felt so relieved when I saw city lights again and we were out of his car. To this day, I can't believe how naive we were and how lucky we were that nothing happened. Story 24. I lived really close to my school when I was a kid, and there was this big thing for us to play on, so naturally, I always went there in the evening before supper or just any time I was bored. It was surrounded by a lot of houses and a busy street, so it was a safe enough place. One day, I went with a friend of mine who was about a year older than me. We had 2 schoolyards, one for the older kids and one for the younger ones. The big plastic thing was in the younger kids' yard. There was a small corridor that let us go between yards, though, and as we're playing, I see this guy wearing a hoodie with the hood up start slowly walking into the yard we were in. We stayed there for about 20 minutes with the guy around, but I felt that something was very off. I was too young to really know what to do and imagined he would leave at some point. The problem was that he was slowly walking around a wall that blocked all the houses from seeing him, and he was much closer to the exit than we were. I will always remember watching him nonchalantly kick a pizza box around as he made his way closer to us. As I turned to my friend to tell her that we had to leave because I felt like something really bad was going to happen, I heard my father bellow my name and saw him running the length of the schoolyard toward the door with my neighbor in tow. My father was in his 60s and took his car everywhere, and that's the first time I ever saw him really run. The guy bolted, and my father trailed after him. My neighbor brought us to my friend's house, as they all knew each other, and we stayed there until pretty late. I remember her mother trying to explain to us what a child molester was. I was 9 at most, and I just knew that I was terrified. My father, my neighbor, and my friend's father all tried to find the guy. I can imagine how scared he must have been. My father was very tall and intimidating, and so were my neighbors. The scariest part of this is that I still have no idea how my father had known, as the guy wasn't visible, and I lived a few houses down from where we were. I'm sure that he saved mine and my friends' lives that day. Story 25. It happened about a year ago. It's a little bit complicated, but I hope you'll understand. We planned to spend one of the last weekends of winter at a ski resort quite close to us. It was me, my boyfriend, and another couple. The plan was to spend the weekend at a cabin that we had access to, but that we knew was in very poor condition. We didn't mind, knowing we had electricity and heating, and that was all we needed. We got there around 6 p.m. It was already dark because we left after work and decided that we would party that night and ski the next day. Anyway, so we get there and soon realize there was no electricity in the entire resort. The whole mountain was in a blackout. We didn't want to leave, even if we could, because it was close to our home, 1-hour drive. I felt weird about it. I said maybe we should leave multiple times, but the rest were really into staying. So I said, okay, we'll try to stay for a bit. But if things get ugly, we leave. And damn, they got ugly. Because there was no electricity, we didn't have heat. The cabin has a heating system that requires electricity and wood. Wood for heating a container of water and electricity to pump the water into the radiators. If we started the fire, the water container would blow up. The boys decided to go into town and get a generator from a friend. They got back with the generator at around 11 p.m. Meanwhile, me and the other girls stayed at the cabin, freezing our ovaries off. We started drinking alcohol and dancing and playing music on our phones to keep ourselves warm. Outside it was a snowstorm. You could barely see your shoes. The boys came back, and we had to help them get some water bottles from the car that was parked 50 meters outside the cabin. It was so dark outside, windy and cold. I never experienced anything even close to that. Anyway, so the cabin has a semi-basement, and we thought it was smart to put the generator there. You may know where this is going. We got electricity and started a fire for the heating. There was so much smoke in the cabin we had to open the windows. That was the moment when I was out. I told them I didn't want to stay anymore. I knew how that was supposed to work, and it was not okay that the chimney was not pulling the smoke away. It was already 1 a.m., and we were all so tired and a bit drunk, and we still decided to stay for a little bit more. Now, let me tell you, it was still freezing cold. I never in my life felt so cold. My body was shaking, and I literally forgot what warmth felt like. We went to sleep, or at least tried to sleep. Me and my boyfriend got a room upstairs, and the other couple stayed downstairs. I tried everything to warm myself. I even proposed to my boyfriend to get naked, and maybe we could warm ourselves a little. I was so scared of the smoke, by then it wasn't that much anymore, that I couldn't rest my mind at all. Fast forward 2 hours later. The other couple comes rushing into our room, barely standing, telling us that we have to leave right now. No time for packing, we just had to leave. They told us nothing more, and we were already out the door. It seems the fumes from the generator got into their room. The guy almost blacked out, and the girl managed to get out but passed out in the snow for a few minutes. On the way home, they told us that he got up to put more wood in the fire, and he felt really dizzy and told his girlfriend to wake up and get out. They were okay by the end, and the fumes didn't manage to get upstairs to us. Story 26. I had taken acid for the first time right after my final ever university exam. It was sunny. I felt not a single obligation in the world. Me and another friend who had taken a tab went to the local park, watched people go about their day. There's a really nice koi pond at the park that we stared at and talked about life around for hours. It's one of the best days of my life. Fast forward, and I wanted to try and replicate the experience. Another friend and I dropped a tab each and went down to the park. We sat at the koi pond, and a man came over to talk to us. We weren't too weird on acid, and could still handle ourselves just fine, so we spoke to him. He seemed fine, if a little odd. He gave us both a Milky Way chocolate bar and was talking about his job. He was a chef at a nearby hotel, but he was also a bit of a handyman, and was telling us about doing some work on his mother's porch over the summer. This was all completely innocent, but it got weird. He told us his mom lived near a big pond and that there were often geese roaming around. He kept reiterating how much he hated geese, called them the devil's animal. My friend and I were laughing at just how much this man hated these little creatures. Then he started talking about how he approached one and picked it up by its neck before wringing it as tight as he could. We kept laughing. He had been fairly jokey up until now, so we thought it was a joke. I need to mention again that we were tripping pretty hard at this point. He kept describing its eyes popping out and the noises it was making. That's when a switch flipped in my brain. My friend was still in hysterics about it. I looked at him, back at the man, then back to my friend and said, "I think it's time we head off." I started to feel really anxious about the chocolate bars, but they seemed completely innocent. I'm still not really sure how to feel about it, or why, of all the days for that to happen, it was that day. Needless to say, I never did replicate that first time.